Ranking the top 10 indie games I've played. So this week I wanted to talk about indie games, but I didn't really know what I would talk about specifically, so I came up with the most unoriginal yet entertaining idea. Let's just go ahead and look at the 10 best indie games I have played so far. Also, quick disclaimer, this isn't a favorites list, this is a best list, and if you're confused on what the difference is, basically in this video I'll be as objective as possible and try to look at the games from a non-biased perspective. Obviously, with an art form as complex as video games, all I can do is try my best. So with that said, here's a list of honorable mentions that just barely missed out on the list. And let's begin. Coming in at number 10, we have Pizza Tower. Now, this was one of the first games I played through in 2024, and I had high expectations, and I'm happy to say the game met those expectations because it was really great. This is a 2D platformer that apparently takes huge inspiration from the Wario Land series of games. I have not played a single Wario game in my life, so I had no clue what to expect with Pizza Tower, but what I got was an original and interesting side-scroller. The central gimmick here is that at the end of each level, you defeat the bad guy and then retrace your steps back to the entrance in a speedrun manner. It's a really great spectacle and it never gets old. I feel like this game struggles with level design sometimes though. During these speedrun moments, sometimes the reaction time needed is kinda crazy. Not to say that the game is unfair or overly difficult, but some of the speedrun sections could have been refined a bit more. But I understand it's difficult to design a complex level to be 100% playable forwards and backwards. I just think some other games have more consistent level quality. Because of this, the game also kinda drags about 2/3 in, but that's completely made up for with the final few levels, which are amazing. So I recommend powering through even if you start to get bored. The bosses are also great too. And of course, you can't not mention the art style and music. And even though I said some speedrun sections can be awkward, the game still has good controls and momentum physics overall. There's not much else to say. You should definitely pick this one up, so let's move on. At number 9, we have Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight was not the first indie game or anything, but releasing in 2014, it really popularized the medium, and is why I might even consider it the most important indie game ever made. It's another 2D platforming game, go figure. One might even say I slightly enjoy games like this. In all seriousness, if I were to describe Shovel Knight in one sentence, this is how I do it. Shovel Knight is a game that borrows from some of the best side-scrolling games of the 1980s, tells the tale of a new adventure that feels just at home for that time period, and while it has some frustrating mechanics sprinkled in, they almost feel like a welcomed addition because they fit the type of game it's trying to be. Yes, that was a very long sentence. So the frustrating mechanics I'm referring to in Shovel Knight is the intentionally stiff controls and the fact that you have a sizable life bar in this game, but falling in a pit still kills you instantly. What's especially annoying about this is you lose money when you die in this game. You can retrieve it if you make it back to the spot, similar to Dark Souls, but the problem is when you fall in a pit, the money bags can spawn in almost impossible areas to reach, which if you're stupid like me, you'll end up dying again trying to get them back, which results in a cycle of you losing even more money. In other words, this game is a masterpiece. Yeah, moments like these are annoying as shit, but you can't lie, it captures the spirit of these retro platformers. And hey, that was the whole point of the game to begin with. I think the rest of the level design in this game is fantastic and the bosses are great too. I think they kinda went overboard with the extra modes in this game. I personally only played through the main original mode, that being Shovel of Hope. The other modes looked interesting and I've heard they're really good, but I just didn't get around to it since I wanted to move on to other games. So let me know if you've played those modes. Like I said, I've heard good things. Even the base mode of this game deserves the praise. Okay, so far we've covered a game with 8-bit graphics and a game with kinda 16-bit graphics, but also kinda 32-bit. Anyway, the point is, this next game is both 8-bit and 16-bit, and that's yet another 2D side-scroller, The Messenger. Yeah, I've talked a lot about 2D platforming games this year, I'm not denying it. And yes, I've mentioned this particular game in like 5 videos already. Some might even say I'm basically doing free ad reads for Sabotage Studio at this point, because I beg you to give this game a try. It's a truly unique video game experience for multiple reasons. Because I've talked about this game so much in recent times, I'll try and keep it brief. This game begins as a linear action platformer heavily inspired by the Ninja Gaiden series on NES, and for a few hours it doesn't really seem like anything more than just a modern Ninja Gaiden game. But this game features two mind-blowing twists that will really shake up your perception of it. First of all, a few hours in, the art style changes from 8-bit to 16-bit, then about an hour after that, you're thinking you might be at the end of the game, but nope, because now now the game turns into a Metroidvania. You can now revisit the areas you've been, but this time with tons of secrets and new content to find. You then go around collecting notes to complete the magic melody that can supposedly break a curse. Once you get all those through various new full-size quests, you're ready for the final boss, but not before you're zooming around the levels going from 8-bit to 16-bit on the fly. Yeah, the level design peaks in both simplicity and complexity in different stages of the game. Even if you don't think it's this almost perfect masterpiece like I do, I think you'll still appreciate its mechanics as a video game. So real quick, before we move on to number 7 on the list, do you notice anything in particular about this list so far? The answer is, you guessed it, every single game on this list runs exceptionally well on the Steam Deck, which wasn't on purpose or anything, but it fits in with today's product review, the BenQ GR10 gaming docking station. Now, it's no secret to me that a great amount of my audience are Steam Deck owners, and if you are, you may be in the market for a docking station if you do not have one already. I know I was, which is the reason I was super excited when beCreatus reached out to me and asked if I wanted to review their mobile docking station. I was like, yeah, I just recently got my Steam Deck and have been wanting a way to use it on my TV or monitor. And this isn't just a dock for the Steam Deck either. The GR10 is compatible with other handhelds like the ROG Ally and can also be used for laptops, MacBooks, and even phones. So you might be saying, why can't I just use an HDMI dongle and connect my Steam Deck to the TV that way? Well, there's several issues you could encounter by doing that, like 1080p resolution cap, Bluetooth latency, and you might not be able to even charge your deck at the same time. So if you encounter any of these issues using a dongle, it's time to upgrade. The GR10 docking station has exclusive features like 4K HDR, USB 4 technology, and 2.5 GB Ethernet. It's also extremely lightweight and portable, has a slick cable management design, and a detachable 90-degree connector for the USB cable. Something interesting I figured out is that the entire dock can actually fit in this tiny sleeve that comes with the Steam Deck. So if you were wondering why the Steam Deck came with this thing, maybe this is the best use for it. The GR10 can also reach 8K 60Hz and 4K 120Hz, so this makes it great for high-end gaming laptops. Me personally, I've been using my Steam Deck basically as its own computer with its own TV screen. That way, if any friends are over, we'd both have our own device to use. I also have a wireless keyboard and mouse to use, which both work using a USB receiver. From my experience, I've encountered zero issues with this docking station. Not only do the games look great, but they feel great to play since there's basically no latency even with Bluetooth. I'm gonna give the BenQ GR10 a review of 8 out of 10 because it works flawlessly on my Steam Deck, but I don't really have a way to test its limits since I don't own an insanely powerful gaming laptop or anything. And if you're looking to pick one of these up for the holiday season, it'll be 10% off on Amazon this Black Friday. Once again, thank you to beCreatus for hooking me up with the GR10. Back to the rankings. At number 7, I chose Lethal Company. It was difficult to choose where to place this game on the list because it's so different than the other games, but it's clear to me that it deserved a spot somewhere. Lethal Company is a multiplayer survival horror game where you travel to different moons to scrap for valuables in local buildings. These buildings can be a facility, a mansion, or even a mine shaft. In these buildings lies tons of distinct monsters with their own behaviors, and that's not all. This game has a huge modding scene as well. People have done so much with this concept, and it's honestly one of the funnest multiplayer games ever. I've had so many hilarious moments with this game that I will remember forever, and that's kinda one of the coolest things a video game can accomplish for you. You really can't find another game that gives you the same experience as Lethal Company. With that being said, it will get stale if you play it too much, even with mods, which might be obvious to some of you, but still, since it's a multiplayer game, it's worth mentioning. While the game may technically be endless, it's not a game I would recommend playing non-stop, or else it's just gonna become less magical. But maybe that's just my experience. It's an amazing game, which is why I played the hell out of it for a few months. I seriously recommend Lethal Company, even if you're not a fan of horror games. And at number 6, we have Dead Cells. I want to start off by saying that I normally do not like roguelike games very much. I've played a few of them like Dave the Diver, God of War Ragnarok's DLC, but out of the roguelike games I've played, the best one by far has got to be Dead Cells. Dead Cells is an indie roguelike game with a, I'm not really sure what to call this art style. It kinda reminds me of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, so I guess you could say PlayStation 1 graphics, but at the same time it's a bit smoother looking, so I'll just say it has a pixel art style. Either way, lie, I love the visuals of this game, but that's not where the game succeeds most. Dead Cells has my favorite combat out of any video game. The combination of incredibly smooth controls and the fact that there's no contact damage is what really seals the deal for me. So even though I typically don't like roguelike mechanics, the game was simply so good that I didn't even care what genre it is. The areas, bosses, music, and amount of content are all fantastic too, and what really got me into this game was the DLC crossovers. Now, I don't remember if the Terraria crossover happened already or if it's still in the works, but I was also very excited to see the Castlevania DLC, and wow, it almost felt like its own whole new Castlevania game. Dead Cells is a masterpiece of a game. If you're like me and you're not a huge fan of roguelikes, you'll still probably like this game, and if you're a big fan of roguelike games already, Dead Cells will end up as one of your favorite games of all time. At number 5, I chose Sea of Stars, an indie JRPG inspired mostly by, well, you know. Even though I played through Sea of Stars before I played Chrono Trigger, the resemblance was still uncanny. Now remember a few minutes ago when I talked about that 2D ninja game for the 5th time in the last 6 months? Well, Sea of Stars is actually Sabotage Studios' most recent release, and it takes place in the same universe as The Messenger, though it takes place like thousands of years beforehand, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, this game is amazing, and I'm gonna try not to get myself into too much trouble by saying this, but dare I say, it does a few things better than Chrono Trigger does. For example, party members can be swapped out mid-battle, which encourages you to use more of your party during your playthrough, rather than in Chrono Trigger where you can kinda just pick your favorites and leave out the other 3. Also, since we're on the topic of Chrono Trigger, Yasunori Mitsuda actually did some composing for this game. He didn't compose all the tracks or anything, but there's a good bit here and they're pretty good. So what is the best thing about this game, you may be asking? Well, that's a difficult question to answer because this game does so many things extremely well. Great combat, great art style, great music, great bosses, great narrative. I guess I'd have to go with the combat since it's the most innovative, but you'd be right to choose any of the listed. The only problem I have with Sea of Stars is that the true ending of the game is unlocked in a very poorly designed way. One of the requirements is to find 60 scattered collectibles that shouldn't be anything more than an optional task. It doesn't add anything to the game and only serves to waste your time. Yes, there's technically a way to track them in the game, but it's still tedious, and like I said, has no reason to be mandatory for the better of the 2 endings. And hey, it's not the end of the world or anything. The reason I hate this feature is because the true ending in this game is something you simply need to do. It's just way more satisfying than the other ending. So despite this issue, Sea of Stars still ends up being one of the best Japan RPGs I have ever played. Coming in at number 4, we have Undertale. Undertale is another top-down RPG, but the reason I gave it the slight edge over Sea of Stars is because I just think it's a bit more impactful and memorable. There's a lot of different value you can get out of Undertale depending on what type of gamer you are. First of all, there's 3 routes you can take in the game. Neutral, which is the standard way to play, but there's also Pacifist and Genocide, which are the 2 opposite extremes. Whether you want the standard way to play in Neutral, the most satisfying ending in Pacifist, or you just want to piss off the fanbase with Genocide, there's many different ways to play Undertale, and I recommend trying all 3. One thing Undertale gets criticized for is the gameplay, but in my opinion, it's not bad at all. It's just different, which doesn't make it bad. Sure, walking around in the overworld can be a bit slower than usual, but the game isn't long anyway, so I don't really care. Also, I love the battle mechanics. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's bad. It's very solid, and I enjoy my time with it, but I think most of us can agree the best thing about Undertale is the music. The music is incredible no matter what route you take. Even if you've never played the game in your life, you have heard music from it. Everybody loves Undertale's soundtrack. Okay, not everybody. My personal favorite route in this game is the Genocide route, because even though it's a bit of a grindy mess, its music, bosses, and narrative is my favorite part of the game. I love this game, it's a modern classic, and I think it deserves number 4 on the list. Coming in at number 3, I went with Stardew Valley. I'm not sure if putting this game at number 3 is considered a hot take or not, but I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. You may just think it's a Harvest Moon clone or some other cheap indie farming game, but no. Stardew Valley isn't anywhere close to just being a game about milking cows. Other things you can do is fishing, mining, fighting monsters, raising pets, messing around with friends, talking to NPCs, dating NPCs, marrying NPCs, and Yeah, there's a lot to do in this game. Even as somebody who doesn't usually sink hundreds of hours into one game, I have over 600 hours in Stardew Valley and over 400 on Steam alone. And you know what? That's the only thing about the game that can be annoying. It just absolutely deletes your free time. So if you personally are having trouble enjoying this game, it's because the first in-game year of Stardew Valley can be a bit slow. Once you get to year 2 and year 3, the gameplay speeds up because you'll have various quality of life upgrades by then. Aside from the slow beginning and somewhat annoying learning curve, this game zaps your time away because it's simply too addicting. Great gameplay, incredibly immersive, and whenever I talk about this game on the channel, I always make sure to remind you guys this game was basically made by one singular person. I'm not talking about, oh, he made the graphics for it, or oh, he's the main director. No, he pretty much did almost everything as far as I'm aware of. So yeah, hats off to Concerned Ape. This guy is a living legend. Also, this game has a great modding scene too. Tons of great mods out there. This is one of the most immersive indie games out there. And at number 2, I went with, in my opinion, the best Metroidvania of all time, Hollow Knight. If you're a big fan of indie games, you've probably tried this game at some point, and whether you didn't understand it or you were like me and got hooked on it, there are a lot of reasons this game has the cult following it does. First of all, it basically revived an entire genre. Sure, there were still some Metroidvanias in between Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Hollow Knight, but the difference is that even if they were still good games, they just lacked originality and consumer interest. Hollow Knight was able to revive this genre not just because it looked so original, because once people played it, word of mouth spread and everyone realized how incredible the gameplay and world was. This game has basically everything going for it: combat, enemy variety, massive amounts of content, phenomenal art style, great music, amazing bosses, and even though it's not my absolute favorite game or anything, on an objective level it is basically a perfect video game experience. This game only has a couple issues and they're so tiny that they're not even really noticeable, so at that point who cares? One of the most defining features of this game is that it's just generally elite in every aspect that a Metroidvania should be. Like, in my opinion, it has the best bosses out of any Metroidvania, the best map out of any Metroidvania, the best art style out of any Metroidvania. I might give best combat to Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, but that's not an indie game, so it didn't make the list. Overall, Hollow Knight is a difficult game, so it's perfectly fine for some people to not enjoy it, but if the difficulty is fun to you, there's really nothing else that could ever hold you back from absolutely loving it. Most people recognize this is one of the greatest indie games ever made. Which brings us to number 1 on the list. Now, I initially thought I would be putting Hollow Knight at number 1, but after doing some thinking, I decided that it simply has to be Terraria. Even though Hollow Knight has the better bosses, I think Terraria can compete with most other things, meanwhile offering the replayability that no other indie game I have played can even come close to competing with. I'm gonna stop comparing it to Hollow Knight though, because even though Terraria has similar gameplay to Metroidvania games, it's still more of a sandbox game. And look, I understand the argument that quality is better than quantity. Just because Terraria can be played for longer than Hollow Knight doesn't automatically make it better, but just sit tight, because the insane replayability is not the only thing that makes Terraria one of the best games ever made. So let's do a brief rundown like always. First of all, love the art style. It may not seem too original nowadays, but keep in mind this game's over 10 years old. It was honestly insanely original back then. I know the graphics themselves have changed over the years, but the core style of Terraria has remained the same, and that's a good thing. Next up is the combat. What's awesome about Terraria is the combat can literally be as simple or as complicated as you please. You can switch between 10 or 20 weapons at a time, or you can swing your sword around like a doofus until you win. There's different classes, different armor sets, equipment items, potions. Terraria gives you so much freedom with how you choose to play the game. The variety in gameplay is simply incredible, and another reason for its replayability. Next is the bosses. They're not the absolute best in the world or anything, but they're still really great, especially considering you can try out so many different strategies on them. And another thing great about this game is the building. Now, obviously the building isn't as good as it is in a game like Minecraft or anything, but you can still build some impressive things. And also, Terraria has one of the biggest modding scenes in all of gaming. There are legitimately endless ways to mod this game, and it's never been easier now that Tmod Loader can be downloaded from Steam. Even as somebody who doesn't really use mods in video games, I can't help but appreciate once again the replayability that this adds. And look, other games on this list have modding communities too, but I just think Terraria's modding scene offers the most variety that I've seen. Back on the topic of Terraria, I think the biggest issue with this game is the learning curve. Since this game is massive with so many weapons, items, and strategies to use, new players will immediately become overwhelmed. I don't care how long you've been playing video games, you'll pick up Terraria and you'll be completely lost with how to proceed because there's just so much substance. If you're somebody who's just now trying to enjoy the game, I recommend playing with friends first, that way they can teach you. Trust me, it saves you a ton of frustration. Anyway, that was a massive yap fest, but I think I covered everything. Oh, also, fun fact about Terraria, it's the best-selling indie game ever made if you don't count Minecraft, which was bought out by a AAA company, so technically is not indie anymore. I'd say it definitely deserved to sell those 58 million copies. So that was my list for the top 10 best indie games that I've played so far. I will continue to play through more indie games as time goes on, so maybe in the future I'll make a follow-up video after my opinions change. As always, be sure to leave your opinions in the comments below. What games would you add to the list? And what would be your top 10 indie games? Let me know what you're thinking, and I'll talk to you again soon.